The evening began like any other summer gathering in Seattle. Emma moved through her living room, arranging candles on the dining table while her husband, right, laughed outside with friends. Their marriage had settled into a calm routine, polite smiles, quiet dinners, and conversations that rarely went beyond the day's chores. They still cared for each other, but the spark that once made their love exciting had faded into comfort. Emma often wondered if this was what marriage became after 12 years, steady, safe, but somehow hollow. That night, Ryan had invited a few old college friends. Among them was Ethan, a man Emma remembered faintly from their wedding photos, but hadn't seen in years. When he walked in, his presence filled the room. He was taller than she remembered, his confidence easy but not showy. His voice had a warmth that drew people in, and when he spoke, his words carried both humor and kindness. Emma noticed how everyone seemed more alive when talking to him, including herself. Dinner flowed effortlessly. The guests laughed over college memories, and Ethan often teased Ryan in ways that made everyone chuckle. Emma found herself watching him, the way his eyes softened when he listened. How he always gave his full attention to whoever spoke. When he asked Emma about her work, she was surprised he remembered what she did. "You still design interiors, right?" he asked with a gentle smile. She nodded, slightly flustered that he remembered such a small detail. "I've always admired people who make spaces feel alive," he said. It was a simple compliment, but it stayed with her throughout the night. Little moments stood out. The quick glances, the small smiles exchanged across the table. When she reached to pass him a dish and their fingers brushed, a strange current ran through her. It wasn't romantic or deliberate, just sudden and electric. She quickly pulled her hand back, forcing a polite smile as she pretended nothing had happened. But deep inside, something shifted. After dinner, the group moved to the patio. Soft music played, and the air was filled with the scent of grilled food and laughter. Ryan was busy showing another friend his new car, leaving Emma and Ethan sitting across from each other. Their conversation came easily about books, travel, and how fast time seemed to pass. He spoke about living in Portland, how he'd been through a difficult breakup and was trying to rebuild his life. Emma listened closely, her heart unexpectedly aching for him. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken so openly in front of her as the night grew late. The guests began to leave. Ethan was one of the last to stand. "It was really good to see you both," he said warmly. Then, turning to Emma, he added softly, "You make this house feel like home." The words were kind, innocent even, but they struck deep. She smiled, unsure how to respond, and watched as he disappeared into the night. When Emma returned inside, the house felt quieter than usual. Ryan was cleaning up, humming under his breath. She offered to help, but he waved her off, focused on wiping the counter. She watched him for a moment, the same man she'd loved for years, and realized how much they'd changed. There was affection, yes, but not the warmth she'd once felt. It was as if they were partners in routine, not love. Later, lying in bed, she tried to push Ethan from her mind. But his words echoed, "You make this house feel like home." Why had that touched her so deeply? Maybe because no one had said something like that in a long time? Ryan appreciated her, of course, but it had been years since he'd looked at her with that same admiration or curiosity. She turned toward him, watching his steady breathing as he slept, and felt both love and distance at once. The next morning, life returned to normal. Ryan left early for work, and Emma began her day answering emails and planning designs for a new client. But every now and then, she caught herself thinking about Ethan's voice, his calm eyes, the way he had truly listened. She told herself it was nothing, just friendly conversation. Yet she couldn't deny the strange energy that lingered in her heart. That weekend, Reen mentioned casually that Ethan might join them for a barbecue next week. "He's been through a lot lately," Ryan said. "It'll be good for him to spend some time around friends." Emma smiled and nodded, but inside, her chest tightened. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was guilt, maybe confusion, or maybe it was fear of feeling something she shouldn't. The week passed, but the memory of that evening stayed with her. The laughter, the glances, the feeling of being seen again. It wasn't love, she told herself. It couldn't be. It was just that someone had reminded her what attention felt like, what connection sounded like. That Friday night, she stood by her bedroom mirror, brushing her hair, lost in thought. She caught herself wondering if Ethan would notice the small changes she made, the way she wore her hair down instead of tied, the soft blue dress she hadn't worn in years. Then she frowned, realizing what she was doing. Why do I care? She asked herself. But deep down, she already knew the answer. When Ethan arrived the next evening, his easy smile returned, and everything around Emma seemed to brighten just a little. Ryan greeted him warmly, unaware of the quiet tension that filled the space. Emma tried to act casual, laughing when needed, focusing on her guests. But every time she looked up, she caught Ethan's gaze lingering just a moment too long, not inappropriately, but with something unspoken. And that was when it truly began. Not an affair. Not betrayal, but an emotional pull she couldn't explain. It was the beginning of a connection that would test her heart in ways she never imagined. That night, after everyone left, Emma stood at the kitchen window, watching the soft rain fall outside. The house was silent again. She felt both alive and afraid alive because someone had stirred feelings she thought were gone, and afraid because she knew how dangerous such feelings could become as she turned off the lights and went to bed. Ryan reached for her hand in his sleep, a small, familiar gesture that should have brought comfort. But her heart was restless. She closed her eyes and told herself it was just a passing thought, that nothing would ever happen. Yet deep down, she sensed that something had already begun, something quiet, delicate, and dangerously real. And as the rain tapped against the window, Emma whispered to herself, I hope I can control what's happening to me. But even then, part of her new control was already slipping away. After that first dinner, Ethan began appearing more often. Sometimes he'd drop by with Ryan for a quick visit. Other times he came along to help with small home repairs or weekend gatherings. Each time, Emma told herself it was nothing that she was overthinking. But the more she tried to ignore it, the more aware she became of every moment. The warmth in his voice, the easy confidence in his laughter, the way he remembered things Ryan often forgot. Her marriage hadn't changed on the surface. Ryan was still kind, still dependable, but distant in ways that were easy to miss. He worked long hours, came home late, and spent evenings glued to his phone or watching TV. When Emma tried to talk about her day, he listened half-heartedly, nodding at the right times but not truly hearing her. She didn't blame him. Life had made them tired. But lately she had started to feel invisible. Ethan, on the other hand, noticed everything. He'd ask, did you change your hair? Or you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? It wasn't flirtation. It was care. Real attention. That was what made it dangerous. One Saturday, Ryan invited Ethan over to watch a football game. Emma stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, but she could hear them laughing. After a while, Ethan came in to grab another drink. You're hiding, he said with a teasing smile. You don't like football, do you? She laughed, shaking her head. Not really. I watch for the snacks. They talked for a few minutes, light, harmless talk, until Ryan called from the living room. Ethan smiled and left, but before he did, his hand brushed hers while reaching for the drink. It was brief, but enough to send a wave of confusion through her. She turned back to the counter quickly, her heart unsteady. The following week, Ryan had to leave early for work. Around noon, Ethan stopped by to drop off some tools Ryan had borrowed. He told me to leave them in the garage, he said. Emma thanked him and invited him in for coffee. It was raining outside, soft and steady, and the house felt too quiet. One cup turned into two, and their conversation flowed easily. They talked about childhood dreams, about how life never really turns out the way you plan. Ethan spoke about his breakup, how it had left him questioning everything. Emma listened, moved by his honesty. Sometimes, he said softly, you can love someone and still feel completely alone. The words hit her harder than he realized. She nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that felt heavy with understanding. She hadn't meant to open up, but she found herself saying quietly, "I know what that feels like." Their eyes met, and neither looked away. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was connection. The kind that sneaks in when two people share what they never say aloud. Then, suddenly, Emma stood up, pretending to check on the kettle. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cups. "You should probably go before the rain gets worse," she said, forcing a smile. Ethan hesitated but nodded. Before leaving, he said softly, "You deserve to be happy." She froze at the doorway as he stepped out, his words echoing long after he was gone that night. She couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. "You deserve to be happy." It was such a simple thing to say, yet it felt like something she'd been waiting to hear for years. Over the next few days, Emma tried to bury those thoughts, but they kept resurfacing. Each time she saw Ethan, her chest tightened. Their conversations became more personal. Gentle confessions shared between two people who should have known better. They never crossed a line physically, but emotionally. She knew they were close to it at a small get-together one evening. Ryan had stepped out to take a phone call, leaving Emma and Ethan alone by the kitchen counter. He handed her a glass of water and said softly, "You've been quiet tonight." She smiled weakly. "Just tired." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You hide it well," he said, "but I can see when something's wrong." Something in his tone made her chest ache. She wanted to say it, that she felt lonely, that she missed being seen. But before she could, Ryan walked back in, laughing about something from work, completely unaware of the moment he'd interrupted. Later that night, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She didn't recognize the woman looking back, not because she looked different, but because she felt different. There was guilt in her eyes, but also something she hadn't seen in a long time life. Emotion, the flicker of wanting something more. The next week, it happened. The moment that changed everything. It was raining again. Seattle rain, soft but endless. Ryan had called to say he'd be working late, and Emma didn't think much of it. She spent the afternoon cleaning until the doorbell rang. When she opened it, Ethan was standing there, rain dripping from his jacket. "Ryan asked me to bring over the papers for his project," he said. She stepped aside, letting him in. They stood in the kitchen again, just like before. The sound of rain filled the silence. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Is everything okay?" Emma tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her voice betrayed her. Without thinking, Ethan stepped closer. "Emma, you don't have to pretend with me," he said gently. She turned away, her eyes glistening. "It's not your problem," she whispered. But he didn't move back. "It's not about problems," he said quietly. "I just don't like seeing you unhappy." When she finally looked up, their faces were inches apart. Time slowed. For a heartbeat, they were two lonely souls standing too close, sharing too much. Then she stepped back suddenly, her breath uneven. "You should go," she said quickly. Ethan nodded, guilt and longing mixing in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to make things complicated." After he left, Emma leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She hadn't done anything wrong, but she knew how close she'd come. The air still carried his scent, and it made her chest tighten. She turned off the lights, sat on the couch, and stared at the rain outside. That night, Ryan came home late as usual, tired and distracted. He kissed her on the forehead and went straight to bed. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spiraling. She didn't want to feel this way. Guilty, confused, drawn to someone she shouldn't be. Yet part of her couldn't forget the warmth in Ethan's voice. The way he saw her when no one else did. She whispered to herself, "This has to stop." But deep inside, she wasn't sure she could, because sometimes the most dangerous connections aren't the ones you act on. They're the ones that live quietly inside your heart, growing stronger every time you try to ignore them. When Ryan left for his business trip, the house felt too big, too quiet. Emma had gotten used to his late nights, but this was different. The silence now stretched into days. She tried to fill the time with work, cleaning, movies, anything to keep her mind busy. But no matter what she did, her thoughts wandered back to Ethan. She hated that. She hated how easily his voice echoed in her mind. How she could remember every word he'd said the last time they spoke. For 2 days, she managed to avoid thinking too much. Then, on the third evening, rain began to fall again, soft, endless, tapping against the windows just like it had the night he'd come over before. She sat curled up on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the water streak down the glass. That was when the knock came. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, holding a small paper bag. "Hey," he said quietly, rain dripping from his jacket. "Ryan asked me to drop this off some documents he forgot." His voice was casual, but his eyes searched hers, as if checking whether it was okay for him to be there. Emma hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, you'll get soaked out there." The house smelled faintly of coffee and rain. She made him a cup, and they sat across from each other in the living room. The sound of the rain filled the spaces between their words. They talked about simple things at first, work, travel, the weather. But soon the conversation turned more personal. Ethan spoke about how he'd been trying to start fresh. How life after his breakup had felt like starting from zero. Emma listened quietly. "It's hard," she said softly. "Starting over. Even when you're not sure what's missing, you just know something isn't right." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, sometimes you don't realize how lonely you've been until someone reminds you what it feels like to be seen." The words lingered. Emma looked away, her heart tightening. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she understood, that she felt the same way, but she couldn't. Instead, she stood to refill her tea. As she passed by, her sleeve brushed his shoulder. He looked up, and for a second, neither of them moved. When she sat down again, the silence grew heavier. Ethan leaned forward, his voice soft. "Emma, I don't want to make things complicated, but you mean a lot to me. You probably don't realize it, but you've been the calm in my chaos lately." Her throat tightened. "Ethan, please," she whispered, unsure what she was asking for to stop or to keep going. He shook his head gently. "I know. I'm not trying to cross a line." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "But I care about you." She wanted to respond, but her words caught. Everything inside her was torn between loyalty and longing. Between what was right and what her heart had started to crave. For years, she had been steady, predictable, careful. But now, sitting across from someone who actually saw her, she felt emotions she couldn't control. When she blinked, she realized her eyes were wet. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said softly. Ethan reached out, instinctively taking her hand. It was a simple touch, warm and steady. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," he said. And then she started to cry quietly, like someone who had been holding it in for too long. Ethan moved closer, his hand gently on her shoulder. "Hey," he whispered, "you don't have to hide." She turned toward him, her breath unsteady. Their faces were close, too close. For a second, it felt like gravity was pulling them together. The warmth, the comfort, the ache, it all mixed into one unbearable moment. Then, just as quickly, reality hit her. Emma pulled away, standing abruptly. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't right." "I can't do this." Ethan froze, guilt flashing across his face. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "It's not your fault," she interrupted. "It's mine. I let this happen." He shook his head. "You didn't do anything wrong. He stopped himself, realizing there was nothing left to say. The silence between them grew thick. Emma turned toward the window, unable to meet his eyes. "Maybe it's best if you go," she said softly. Ated nodded. "Yeah." He grabbed his jacket, paused at the door, and looked back at her. "For what it's worth, Emma, I never meant to hurt you." She nodded without speaking. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the night. When she closed the door, her heart felt heavy and hollow all at once. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. She hadn't done anything she couldn't take back, but she had come close enough to know how fragile her resolve had become. The storm outside matched the one inside her. Hours passed before she moved again. She cleaned the untouched cups, wiped the counter, and tried to pretend it was just another night. But everything felt different. The air seemed too still, the house too quiet. She sat by the window, staring at the rain. Her reflection faint in the glass. She thought of Ryan, of how loyal he had always been, how patient. He didn't deserve this. He didn't know that his wife had just stood in their living room, fighting the pull of another man's kindness. When Ryan called that night to check in, Emma answered with a shaky smile. "How's the trip?" she asked, trying to sound normal. He talked about meetings, hotels, and late dinners, completely unaware of the storm behind her voice. When he said, "I miss you," she had to turn away so he wouldn't hear the crack in her breathing. "I miss you too," she whispered after the call. She sat in silence for a long time. She wished she could erase what had happened, the look in Ethan's eyes, the warmth of his touch, the truth it revealed about her own emptiness. She felt guilty for what she had almost done, but even more for what she had wanted. The next morning, she woke early and went for a walk in the light drizzle. The streets were quiet, the air cold and clean. With every step, she told herself she would put this behind her. She wouldn't see Ethan again, not alone, not ever. She had made a mistake, but she still had time to make it right. Still, a part of her knew that something had changed forever. The wall she once had between loyalty and longing had cracked. Ethan had awakened feelings she thought had died years ago, the need to feel wanted, to feel alive. As she stood on the bridge watching the river move below, Emma realized she was at a crossroads. She could let this moment define her, or she could use it as a warning. A reminder of how easily love can drift when it's left unattended by the time she returned home. Her decision was clear. She would not let her heart wander again. She would fix what was broken, even if it took everything she had. But as she closed the door, looked at the empty space where Ethan had stood the night before. She couldn't help but wonder, could some things ever truly be undone? The rain fell softly outside, carrying away the last traces of what had almost happened. But not the memory that she knew would stay with her forever. The morning after Ethan left, Emma felt like she was waking up from a dream she didn't want to remember but couldn't forget. Everything around her looked the same. The quiet house, the smell of coffee, the faint hum of the refrigerator, yet nothing felt the same anymore. She had crossed an invisible line, not with actions, but with emotions. And now every breath felt heavier because of it. When Ryan returned from his business trip 2 days later, he walked through the door with his usual easy smile, holding a small gift for her, a silver bracelet he'd picked up at the airport. "Thought you'd like it," he said cheerfully. Emma smiled, forcing warmth into her voice. "It's beautiful," she replied, slipping it onto her wrist. But inside she felt a twist of guilt so sharp it nearly stole her breath. He kissed her forehead, then began talking about his trip. Long meetings, flight delays, the usual small complaints. Emma listened, nodding at the right moments, trying to seem normal. Yet all the while, her heart was somewhere else, replaying the night she wished she could undo. She couldn't look Ryan in the eyes for too long. Every time she did, she felt the weight of what she had almost done with Ethan pressing down on her chest for the next few days. She tried to move forward. She focused on work, made dinner, went for walks with Ryan, laughed when she needed to. But a distance had quietly formed, invisible yet real. Ryan noticed. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening while they were watching TV. "Is everything okay?" Emma hesitated, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Just tired," she said softly. He reached over and took her hand, giving it a light squeeze. "You've been working too hard. We should take a trip soon, just us." Her heart broke a little at his kindness. He had no idea that her silence wasn't about work or exhaustion. It was guilt and confusion. She nodded and smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. A week later, Ethan sent a short text message. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm leaving for Portland next month. I think it's best." Emma stared at her phone for a long time, unable to respond. There was relief in his words and pain too. She typed a reply several times, then deleted it each time. In the end, she sent only 2 words. "Take care." That night she sat outside on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. Her heart ached, not for Ethan alone, but for everything that had led her here. She hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She hadn't planned for a friendship to become something more complicated. Yet she couldn't deny what it had revealed, how much she missed being truly seen in the following weeks. Ethan stopped coming around. Ryan mentioned him a few times, wondering why he hadn't returned his calls. Emma only shrugged, pretending not to know. She wanted to tell Ryan the truth about the moments, the conversations, the almosts. But she couldn't. It would destroy him, and for what? Nothing had happened, not really. And yet it had changed everything. One rainy evening, while Ryan was reading by the fire, Emma finally spoke. "Do you ever feel like we've become strangers?" She asked softly. He looked up, surprised. "Strangers?" "No." "Why?" She stared at the flames. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we talk, but we don't connect anymore." Ryan put his book down and turned toward her. "Emma, I know I've been distracted. Work, stress. I guess I took us for granted. But you're my home. I don't want to lose that." His words hit her like a wave. All the emotions she had buried came rushing to the surface, the loneliness, the guilt, the longing. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't want to lose it either," she whispered. That night, for the first time in a long while, they talked, really talked, about how distant they'd become, how small cracks had formed over the years. Ryan admitted he hadn't noticed how lonely she'd been. Emma confessed she had felt invisible. There were tears, apologies, and long silences. But in those silences, something began to mend. After that, they started rebuilding what they had lost. It wasn't quick or easy. They took evening walks together, made time for dinners without phones, and even planned small weekend trips. Ryan started paying more attention, asking questions, listening. And Emma, in turn, started opening up again. Slowly, honestly. Still, Ethan remained a quiet shadow in her mind. Sometimes when she was alone, she would think about him, about the warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice, and how close they had come to falling. But instead of guilt, she began to feel something else, gratitude, because through him she had seen her own emptiness. And that had forced her to face the truth about her marriage. Months passed. One morning, Ryan mentioned that Ethan had moved permanently to Portland. He'd gotten a new job and was doing well. Emma smiled faintly. "That's good," she said. It was the first time she could say his name without her heart aching as the years went on. Life settled back into rhythm, but this time it was different. There was warmth again between her and Ryan, not the fiery passion of youth, but a steady, deeper kind of love. They had almost lost each other without realizing it. The experience had reminded them both that love isn't something you can leave unattended. It needs effort, care, hey? And attention, the same things Emma had once found in Ethan's eyes. One autumn evening, Emma stood by the window watching the rain fall just like that night months ago. The sky was gray, the streets wet and glowing with reflections. Ryan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. She smiled softly. "No, just remembering." He kissed her temple. Good memories or bad ones? She looked out at the rain, her voice calm. Necessary ones. He didn't ask what she meant, and she didn't explain. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. They just lived quietly inside you, shaping who you became. As the rain continued to fall, Emma realized that what she had felt for Ethan wasn't love. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that she had been losing touch with herself, with the parts of her heart that once made her alive. She had mistaken attention for affection, comfort for connection. And though she had nearly lost everything, she was grateful that she hadn't crossed that final line. Love, she understood now, wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing again and again, even when the world outside offered something easier or newer. She had chosen to stay, to fight for what was real, to rediscover the man who had once been her everything. The past was behind her, but its lesson would always stay. Sometimes temptation isn't a test of love, but a reminder of what you need to rebuild. As the fire crackled softly behind her, Emma leaned into Ryan's arms and whispered to herself, "This time I won't let the distance grow." Outside, the rain kept falling, gentle, steady, cleansing, washing away what once was, and leaving behind only what truly mattered.